Now we've got the ethics czar under President Obama, Norm Eisen. Norm, thank you so much for coming back on.
Thank you for having me back, Brian.
So I want to talk about the Supreme Court's immunity ruling. In light of this new ruling that would basically grant Donald Trump vast immunity, I want to read you a section of the Constitution. This is Section 1. This is Article 1, Section 3. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal of office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit in the U.S. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. So is the new Supreme Court ruling not in violation of the plain text of the Constitution by suggesting that a president now isn't subject to indictment because he's got this new wide berth of immunity?
The only way that section that you just read makes sense is if the words according to law mean according to what we, the members of the Supreme Court, say.
Right,
so
right.
Now
because we have law, we have statutes that Donald Trump violated. Whether it's the classified documents case, and we have espionage laws. You can't retain classified documents. It's the illegal retention of classified documents in the D.C. case, blocking the certification of a congressional proceeding. I mean, all of these are already law. They're already statute.
You may see Pete the cat, by the way, during our conversation. Okay. Say hello, Pete. I put him out of the TV studio, but somehow he made
That's right.
it back
This is a
Brian.
very pro animal show right here. So we're all good.
So the answer to that question is that it's been inconceivable for our entire history as a nation that a president would be put above the law in this way, that you would have the corrupt and conflicted and complicit Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas substituting their judgment for the words in the Constitution. That is what has happened now. It is one of the worst, one of the most unlawful decisions in United States history, together with the Dred Scott case that so unjustly enforced slavery, the Plessy v. Ferguson case that set up Jim Crow, Korematsu, which allowed concentration camps for Americans of Japanese American ancestry, and now this. I think it will go down in history as one of our worst cases and dangerously empowers a president. If there is a second Donald Trump presidency or otherwise, a terrible peril by flouting the Constitution. And we have to ask ourselves, how did we get a Supreme Court that could behave this way? If you look at the history, it's not just Thomas and Alito who have terrible conflicts. Alito's house can be mistaken for insurrection headquarters. Both of his houses were flying the insurrection flag. Yeah. Clarence Thomas's wife is up to her neck in the pregame for the insurrection, including evidence that she communicated with Thomas about the planning for insurrection. And then you have the other justices as well who have an asterisk by their names because Republicans in Congress manipulated to keep Barack Obama from appointing the seat that's now filled by Gorsuch. And Brian, then they turned around and despite saying, oh, no, we can't have consideration of Merrick Garland, it's an election year. After people had already started casting ballots to throw Donald Trump out, after we knew that it was likely he was going to lose, they rammed through Amy Coney Barrett. Right. So we shouldn't even call him the Supreme Court. We should call him the MAGA court.
Norm, in the military, you have to disregard an illegal order. So what happens in the event that the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, the final arbiter of this stuff, offers up an illegal ruling of their own? And I'll contend that this is illegal because, A, their ruling here was created out of whole cloth and literally does not exist in the Constitution, this theory of presidential immunity, and B, The authors of the Constitution did give lawmakers civil immunity under the speech and debate clause, so by negative inference, we could make the argument that they consciously opted not to include presidential immunity in there. So how does it work if the highest court in the land issues a nakedly unconstitutional order?
The military will follow the rulings of the Supreme Court, even if it is flying in the face of the Constitution. The military is not going to put their judgment above that of the Supreme Court. But here is the danger that you correctly identified. This opinion authorizes death squads because it says that when the president has exclusive and preclusive constitutional authority, which he does, to command the military or to command the FBI or domestic law enforcement, when he has that authority, he cannot be questioned. So the dissent says, and I think they are absolutely right, Justice Sotomayor, the dissent says that if the president orders an assassination using those authorities, there's no recourse left. That is the horror, the nightmare that this decision represents. But it's not all bad news, because what we've seen, and again, and we saw it with all three of those decisions I talked about, Dred Scott, Plessy, Korematsu, the country will not abide such illegality permanently. Yeah. So we are going to need to talk about a path to fix this terrible injustice, and that is going to be a long-running conversation. The Supreme Court has exposed themselves for the MAGA court that they are.
Now, I do want to get into possible solutions here, and I want to discuss the prospect of court expansion or holding hearings. But one more question here, and that is that the basis for this case was that a president, like you said, could order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a presidential rival. So I'm not going to ask you why Joe Biden doesn't do that, because you and I both know that he's not going to do that. But I understand the sentiment behind it, and a lot of people have been asking me this question: why doesn't Joe Biden just do this? But I will ask this as a thought experiment. Is there anything stopping Joe Biden, for example, now that he has this newfound wide berth of presidential immunity from the Supreme Court, from stating that Donald Trump is a threat to national security for his past incitements of violence, and so he's making it an official act here to order Trump's arrest?
Yes, I think that if Biden did that now, even based on Trump's post-presidential conduct, the behavior right now, the courts would abhor it. They would reject it. They would refuse to tolerate it. The problem, and we know when we study autocratic regimes, and you have an extremely important book coming on this topic, we know when we study the decay of democracy and we study autocratic regimes, they don't boil the frog all at once. They take gradual steps. It took Putin a long time before he started ordering extrajudicial killings.
Yeah.
So I think the immediate danger of this, of course, Biden won't engage in any of that conduct. The greater danger is that the opinion sets up a kind of permission structure for Trump to do other lesser things, like using the Department of Justice and the FBI to investigate his adversaries, to drag them over the coals, to open grand juries, to issue subpoenas, using the IRS to go after his adversaries, all of the things that Nixon wanted to do. And John Dean, who was a key figure in the Nixon Watergate scandal, and in bringing that nightmare to an end, by cooperating. Dean says that this decision makes all of that legal. So that's the immediate danger. Biden won't do it. The risk is that Donald Trump, should he return to office, will. And that's why it's so important, whoever the Democratic nominee may be, anyone is preferable to the prospect of a Donald Trump emboldened by this decision and threatening to start imposing autocracy, anything is preferable to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because a lot of people view this election, I think, just to go off topic for a moment, a lot of people view this election as a way to either reward or punish Joe Biden. But this election is not about Joe Biden. Joe Biden is not long for this world. We're going to be here a hell of a lot longer, and it's us who are going to have to deal with the consequences of a Supreme Court, for example, that is continuing to hand down decisions on abortion, contraception, IVF, fair maps, democracy itself, LGBT rights, same-sex marriage. I mean, the list goes on and on. Joe Biden will be fine. It's us who have to live with that. So this election is not, you're not casting your ballot for or against Joe Biden. This is the future of the country that we want to live in. Norm, do you think that, going back to the topic that I said I wanted to start diving into here, do you think then that the Senate Judiciary Committee, for example, where we do have a majority, is making a mistake by not holding hearings here? And yes, I understand that the end of this process, impeachment or conviction, wouldn't happen, but does that mean that we still abdicate our responsibility to shine some sunlight on what's happening here?
There's a number of senators, Senator Whitehouse has been the most outspoken about this, who want much more robust activity using all the levers that we have to call out this corrupt MAGA court. And certainly Senate hearings should be part of that. My study of history suggests, and I've written a number of books about it, suggests that these kinds of injustices will not stand. It's not an if question, it's a when. And so those Senate hearings could be an important part of laying the groundwork after we've seen the Supreme Court, this radical MAGA court. First, it was Dobbs taking away the power of women to choose. Indeed, that affects all of us. Then you saw them destroying the ability of government in their case, setting aside the Chevron doctrine, basically saying government can't regulate, can't keep our air and our water clean, can't keep our kids and our families safe. They stripped that power away. Then they gave this imperial presidency. It's hearkening back to when we had a king over us, King George III. That's what Independence Day celebrated, getting rid of King George III. This will not stand, and I will, and you and I will be talking about this for years to come. It is going to be a campaign. It's a terrible thing, but it's also a privilege. If you or any of your viewers ever looked at the campaign for civil rights to end Jim Crow and admired those heroes, I got to know John Lewis. Used to make me laugh when I was doing work in Congress. He would say, "Norm, you're my hero." I say, "John, that's ridiculous. You're my hero." If we ever admired them, the campaign begins now, Brian. We've got to have term limits on the court. We've got to have more members of this court. We're going to have to change the filibuster in the Senate that requires 60 votes to do anything real. The constitutional power is there to vary the makeup of the court and the length of its members serving. There's other things that can be done, and that is among the critical changes that we're going to have to work to. After Trump v. U.S., after this opinion, we no longer have a Supreme Court. We have a MAGA court, and they've made a mockery of the Constitution and the law, and that is going to have to change, and it will change. It's just a question of when.
Norm, how do you reconcile when you have a Democratic Party that wants to protect the institutions that Republicans are trying to tear down, but at the same time, in doing so, doesn't seem to be up for the fight that Republicans are bringing them? So, we are just kind of blindly relying on the courts, even as the courts are showing that they're fully aligned with Donald Trump and his agenda and willing to do their bidding. And it kind of feels like, far from even bringing a knife to a gunfight, we're showing up with a spoon. We're showing up empty-handed. So I guess what's your message to those in charge who continue to defer to the institutions, but not seek to think critically about the fact that if we just carry on in this path, we're going to lose?
We won with making the election on a referendum on Donald Trump in 2018. In 2020, it was a referendum on him. We won. In 22, his candidates were rejected. And I've lost count of how many times Trump has been pronounced politically dead, Brian.
Yeah.
He keeps coming back from the grave. He's the presidential equivalent, the political equivalent of a vampire or a zombie. He keeps coming back from the political grave. I think this wake-up call of this Supreme Court decision, the whole term, the powers, they're arrogating to themselves. Those words you read, when it said law, they said, well, but they've added a new clause to the Constitution. But basically, the law is what I, conflicted, corrupt, complicit Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito, say it is. Why are they even sitting on this case? It's crazy. It's against federal law. There's a federal law that says judges are not permitted to have those conflicts. So yes, it is time for us. It's a wake-up call. Look, the conservative movement was pronounced down and out 1964 when LBJ trounced Goldwater. They didn't quit. They said, we are going to build. They invented institutions. They empowered the Chamber of Commerce. They built the Federalist Society. Federalist Society has totally captured this court. The actual agenda is an economic agenda. And let me tell you, it's not an agenda of getting more prosperity to you and to me. It's those billionaires who gave Clarence Thomas $4 million. Think of it. $4 million, right? No wonder the Supreme Court, they also did this term. They basically legalized bribery between this immunity case. You can no longer prove a bribery case. And another decision that they made on making it very tough to establish the illegality of gratuities to public officials. So we are going to have to take an example from that struggle. I hope it won't be that long. I think it can be done shorter. We've got to make sure that 2024 is a referendum on these issues, that everybody knows what they're voting on. But we got to keep an eye on the contest in 26, the contest in 28. The good news is, yes, there are examples when you get an autocrat, if Trump should be successful, where they defeat all opportunities to oust them. But history, contemporary political science offer us plenty of examples where if you keep your eye on the prize, you focus on that horizon, we all wage this peaceful political battle together, then what you get is like the Polish example. Autocrats took over Poland. They were ousted a few years later at the ballot box. We don't want the Hungarian example, where all efforts to get rid of the autocrat there, Viktor Orban, have failed. So I talked to you before we went on the air. This has been some of the toughest days that I've experienced in over 40 years of doing this work. But I'm actually optimistic and confident this will not stand if we all determine that it won't.
Well, I appreciate the optimism, and I'm absolutely certain that the audience does too here. So, Norm, with that said, thank you so much for taking the time. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Brian.